Let's start all over if we may and get a motion and a second on the bill. We got a motion and a second, and the amendment makes the bill. And we got a motion and a second on the amendment. If you will proceed, Representative Hardaway. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. And the bill before you, as amended, will require the department to repurchase 2014 voter guides and polling place posters. And the real thrust of getting this bill before you committee, Mr. Chairman, is what democracy is all about. Our young folks from the colleges asked for this, and I would ask that the committee would indulge one of their spokespeople who wants to speak on the bill itself.
I don't have a problem with that, Representative Hardaway, but just can you tell us what the bill specifically does? I know you can't kind of give us a broad, but can you specifically tell what this bill is trying to accomplish with regard, I believe, to voter access? Is that correct?
Yes, sir. We believe that the bill as amended would increase voter access and still allow voter integrity, election integrity, to be preserved. This amended version speaks to the photo ID requirements.
And specifically, Representative Hardaway, what does it do with regard to the photo ID requirements?
It allows for one form of photo ID, and it also speaks to the provisions that we have where we have disallowed some forms of photo ID, and the young people who are here to speak to you really believe that their college IDs are valuable in the sense that not only should they be useful for college events, but also for accessing the voting booth.
Before we go into recess, I believe Chairman Hill had a question for you.
Yeah, I've got a couple.
Chairman Hill, you're recognized.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. We've got a couple questions on the amendment that's before us. First of all, the amendment makes the bill, correct?
That's correct, sir.
All right. Under Section 3 of the bill, it says that you want to delete the language verification of, meaning verification of the voter as in Section 2-7-112A, and you want to substitute the words verification of with the language comparison of the signature. So what is the effective difference between verifying who the person is when they show their photo and comparison of the signature? What is the rationale behind doing that?
Well, for the technical explanation on that, I would ask that you have legal speak to that, sir. I believe it's a matter of terms.
Mr. Chairman.
You're recognized. I'm sorry. Did you?
No, that's fine. Mr. Chairman, if you'd like to go into recess, we can come back and I can continue to ask these questions and give legal time to look some of this stuff up.
If there are no objections, we'll go into recess. Representative Hardaway, I believe you had one guest that wanted to speak. Is that correct?
Yes, sir. Justin Jones.
If the guest will come and identify himself and who he is with, we stand in recess without objection. What? Out of session. Out of session, as I've been corrected by the clerk, the research.
Good afternoon, Mr. Chair, members of the committee. My name is Justin Jones. I serve as chairman of the Nashville Student Organizing Committee. We as students are here today to once again take up the fight waged by our ancestors, our parents and grandparents almost 50 years ago for the right to vote. As Congressman John Lewis reminded all of us, as someone who began as a student himself right here in Nashville, challenging the immoral system of Jim Crow, the history of the right to vote in America is a history of conflict, of struggle for that right. Many people died trying to protect that right. Yet once again, we find voting access and rights under attack in state legislatures all across this nation in the form of voter ID laws. These laws have a discriminatory and disproportionate effect on us as students, on African Americans, on Hispanics, on senior citizens, and on the disabled. I would like to direct our attention to a quote by one of the representatives on this committee, Representative Durham, who, when asked why college students should not be able to use their student ID to vote, responded that we want the right people voting in last session. My question is, who are the right people? Should we not want all people to vote? Secondly, I would like to direct our attention to a statement by our Honorable Chair, Mr. Joe Carr, who said that if they take our Second Amendment away, they're going to take away every other amendment in the Bill of Rights. I agree with you, Representative Carr, Chairman Carr. But I also believe that if they take away our right to vote, the right that protects all of our other rights, that is protected by the First Amendment, that is protected by the 14th Amendment, that is protected by the 15th Amendment, that is protected by the 19th Amendment, that is protected by the 24th Amendment, that is protected by the 26th Amendment, that they can also take away all of our other rights. Our right to vote is our most powerful nonviolent weapon. Why are we making it easier to access guns but harder for people to vote? Last midterm election in 2010, Tennessee had the second lowest voter turnout in this nation. We should be making it easier for people to vote. We should be appealing to people to vote rather than making it harder by putting up unnecessary barriers to vote. I've registered to vote. I have my voter registration and my student ID. This is all I have. I have no Tennessee ID. I don't even have an ID from where I was born because when I came here I was 17, so this ID works and this works. In so many other states across this nation, this is enough to vote. But in Tennessee, we're saying that no, this is not enough. We want you to go through another set of hurdles to go vote. And so it's not only for us, but it's for working class people who have to take time off work to go down to the 10 Dot Center and get the ID. It's not just for us, it's for the working mother who has to find babysitters so that she can go take the time to go stand in line and get an ID. We are here on behalf of so many members of this community. And so we ensure you to really, take on the issue of voter fraud. Because since 2000, there have been 14 cases of voter fraud, none of which would had to do with voter impersonation, which is the only type of fraud this would have prevented. And so if we really want to go after voter fraud, let's go after voter suppression. Let's go after people who, change ballots, poll workers. Let's go after the fraud committed with absentee ballots, not making it harder for people to vote with their identification. And so I ask you that, we do want to take the issue of voter fraud on, but voter fraud is no more dangerous to the integrity, as we like to say, of our voting system than voter suppression. They are equally abhorrent, and they equally must be addressed. And so we appeal to you to support this legislation. We ask that you please take a stand for voting rights, especially here in Tennessee. We have a lot of people saying how they want to take this nation back. They want to take it back, and we believe them. They want to take it back to a time that you and I don't want to go to. And so with that, we submit the bill and hope that you approve the bill. Thank you.
Sir, you're not dismissed.
Oh.
I think you have questions. Chairman Hill, you're recognized.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. And I apologize. I didn't catch your name at the very beginning. Could you please?
Justin Jones.
Mr. Jones. Mr. Jones, where do you go to school?
Fisk University.
Fisk University, okay. Are you currently registered to vote?
Yes, sir.
Okay.
Right here.
And I was listening very closely to your comments. Two things that stuck out to me, and I want to make sure I'm not putting words in your mouth, so help me make sure I'm being clear. You believe that voter identification laws that we currently have on the books that require you to show a photo ID to prove you are who you say you are, you feel that inhibits people's ability to exercise their right to vote. Is that correct?
That's incorrect. I feel that the specific points of identification are what I'm standing against, because this ID is equally can prove who I am just as much as the specific requirements of a gun permit, a voter ID, of a passport, which are very expensive to come.
Please do not be argumentative.
Sorry.
So, okay. So I just want to be clear. The reason, and I have in the past opposed using a college ID as a valid form of identification for voting, and one of the reasons is, and I have a 4-year university in my district, Mr. Jones, is the the college IDs expire, and I know that driver's licenses do as well. Some of us don't age as gracefully, so I don't look anything like I used to on my college ID. But for some of the other folks, it's not always the same. And you have that whole issue as well with college IDs of people that do not reside here in the state or in the district that they would be voting in because they're going to school here, but they're from other states, they're from other locations. So I think that that's something to just kind of put into consideration. And I know that driver's licenses do as well. Some of us don't age as gracefully, so I don't look anything like I used to on my college ID. But for some of the other folks, it's not always the same. And you have that whole issue as well with college IDs of people that do not reside here in the state or in the district that they would be voting in because they're going to school here, but they're from other states, they're from other locations. So I think that that's something to just kind of put into consideration. I know in the voter ID law that we passed, no one has to pay to receive a photo ID if they can't afford one. They don't have to pay for it, because I agree with you. We don't want to suppress that vote. Your second contention that I really honed in on was you said that there had been no cases, and I want to make sure I get the phrasing right, there had been no cases of voter, what the word you used, since 2000?
In-person voter fraud.
Okay. I would submit to you that part of the reason that we, as a legislature, that passed this law was because there were many cases of dead people casting votes and dead people casting ballots. I don't know any other way you're going to validate that a live human being is doing the one voting than having that photo ID. And so there has been a number of cases where, and they've been documented and some have even been prosecuted, to where dead people have been voting in certain parts of the state. So,
Chairman Hill, do we have a question?
Yeah, the question. No, that's fine. The question is you made the statement that this is voter suppression. The current law on the books is voter suppression. Why, if the ID is free, no one has to pay for the ID, why do you feel that that is voter suppression?
Okay. May I respond, Mr. Chair?
Please.
To your first point about college students coming here to vote, the Supreme Court case of Sim v. United States gives college students the right to vote where they go to college, number one. Secondly, this is voter suppression because though the ID is free in name, the documents it takes to get a photo identification include two forms of citizenship. So you need your birth certificate, your social security card, you need two evidence of your residency. You have to go through that and the time it takes to go down to the station to wait in line for this. And so the ID is said to be free in name. And secondly, you have to ask for the ID. In Tennessee, you have to ask for the ID to be free. In order for it to be free, and you have to prove that you have no other forms of identification according to the Secretary of State's website. Thank you.
Representative Durham, you're recognized.
Why do we even have voter ID laws requiring someone to identify themselves before that we allow them to vote? Why do we have those?
Because we do want to preserve the integrity of the voting system. And I think there's a misconception that I'm here against voter ID. I'm here against restrictive forms of ID. So
I only asked the question.
Why do we have voter ID laws?
Correct.
As I said, we're here to have voter ID laws to preserve the integrity, to make sure people actually...
Make sure the right people are voting in our elections, right?
Exactly. And so what makes it...
Why was that controversial? Why did you bring that up in your speech, if it's not controversial?
It is controversial because you were asked specifically in last session why college students should not be able to vote by Representative Bo Mitchell.
That's not the question he asked.
Gentlemen, please refrain from talking over each other. We've got decorum in here, and I think what we're going to do, and the chair has been, for this whole session, been quite lenient with regard to debate, but we're not going to do crosstalk and talk over each other. So what I'm going to do now is I'm going to impose at the pleasure of the chair, I'm going to recognize you so that we make sure that each one of us has our turn so we can have the proper decorum. So with that being said, Representative Durham, you're recognized.
So how many, so you're saying that any college ID should allow you to vote in an election in the state of Tennessee. Is that what you're saying?
Mr. Jones, you're recognized.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Yes, I am saying that a college ID from a resident from a university here in Tennessee, if somebody lives here and goes to school here, they should be able to use their college IDs to vote.
How many college?
You're recognized.
How many colleges are in the state of Tennessee?
I'm actually not familiar with that.
Are you aware that those part-time poll workers that would look at an ID are not full-time employees?
I am aware of that.
So, I mean, I don't know how many there are, but let's say that they're in McNairy County and you have a college ID that they've never seen before from East Tennessee State University, how on earth are they supposed to know if that's valid or not?
Because it says university. It's an ID with your picture on it, with your name on it. That's what we ask for in other states. That's what we asked for before this. And so it has your picture and your name on it. It says East Tennessee University. I think that would prove that you're here in Tennessee. And then if you also have a voter registration, because you're not just required this, you have voter registration cards in addition to this. And so that's how you prove who you are.
Representative Durham, you're recognized.
So you're saying that just because something has your picture and says that you're a resident of Tennessee, that it automatically is valid?
I'm saying that may I be recognized?
Mr. Jones, you're recognized.
I'm saying
Thank
that in addition to having to, you have to register to vote. Because I've never been able to vote without registering. And so in order to register to vote, you have to prove who you are. You have to give your address already. And so you're going through that process. Then, in addition to this process, now you have to go get another ID to go vote. So this is not good enough anymore. This card that I waited in line for down at the 10 Dot Center is not good enough. Now I need to have another form ID. This doesn't work either. So I have to go get a Tennessee State ID, a gun permit, or a U.S. passport.
Mr. Durham, you're recognized. Representative Durham, you're recognized.
Do you have a driver's license?
No, sir, I do not. I'm sorry.
Do you have a passport?
No, sir, I do not.
Is there any significant hurdle that you face in obtaining a driver's license or a passport?
Yes, sir. Cost and time and the necessary documents. To go, I have to get my birth certificate sent to me. I don't know where my social security card is, even though I am a resident. And so there are a lot of hurdles to get that, to get these necessary forms of identification. And so there are hurdles. And I just want to make one point that these forms of ID, like having a passport, going to travel, having a driver's license, those are conveniences. Not everyone has the same privileges to go drive or to get on an airplane like like many people do. And so that's why not everyone has those form of documents.
You have one more question? You're recognized for one more question, Representative Durham.
Chairman Hill addressed the issues that I would have raised about how lenient and how easy it is to obtain a driver's license. I just want to reflect that at this point in the conversation.
Thank you, Representative Durham. Representative Parkinson, you're recognized.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. But Mr. Chair, with your indulgence, I believe Representative Miller was prior before me.
Oh, I'm sorry.
Yes, sir.
My apologies, Chairman Miller. I didn't see you, so you are recognized.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman, and thank you, Mr. Jones,
Thank you.
for being here. And you represent your organization very well. And the name of the organization again
Is the Nashville Student Organizing Committee.
I'm inclined to agree with you. As a representative, sitting representative, I did not support voter ID laws because I felt the same way, that it was more of how do you suppress voter turnout as opposed to stopping fraud. But in your research, and it seems as if you've done some extensive factual research,
Yes.
in the cases of the number of frauds that your research showed, could you tell me, what did that show to you?
They showed 14%, 14 cases of actual fraud, all having to do with either absentee ballots or problems with the voting machine. None of it had to do with in-person voter fraud.
14.
Yes, sir, since 2000.
Now, you may have this research, or you may not. I should have done the research, but I'm wondering, after voter photo ID laws were passed and the inconvenience that it may have caused the voters, I'm wondering what percentage of voters after the passage of these laws, for whatever reason, did not show up, although they may have been eligible, but they did not. In other words, what was the percentage of voter turnout after the passage of the laws?
Well, because of these laws, after these laws were enacted, 25% of African Americans no longer have the right identification to vote. 18% of college students, and 18% of senior citizens, 15% of low-income people. And so we do see a very disproportionate impact that these laws have on certain, often marginalized groups in our communities and society.
So these individuals, 25%, could have very well been eligible to vote, legally able to vote.
Yes, sir.
Tennesseans,
Yes, sir.
but 25% potential drop-off based on 14 cases of fraud. That is a self-explanatory injustice based on false facts and, in my opinion, not just in the state of Tennessee, but all over this country, those laws began to take effect like wildfire. And there was a reason behind that. And that reason was to suppress voter turnout. And again, thank you for being here. Thank you all for being here. Keep up that fight. Regardless of what hurdles that are put before you, go around them, go under them, go through them, get past them, and you will. I have no doubt in my mind that you will be successful in what you're trying to change in law. Thank you. Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Representative Parkinson, you're recognized.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Mr. Chair, just want to touch on a couple of things. One is, and I thank you for your leadership on this committee and keeping the decorum of the committee. I think we have to be careful and make sure that we do not intimidate individuals that come before us to speak before us, because they're here to inform. Sometimes our names are called based on what is on the record, but what is on the record is on the record, and we just have to stand by what we put on the record. All of us here, as committee members, we're not experts in everything, and we get everything before us. And I can understand and the passion coming from both our legislators in this matter, and understand the passion coming from this group in this matter as well. But I think it's important that we are welcoming to our citizens when they come before us in these committees. And I just want to touch on that. And I thank you for your leadership, Mr. Chair, in that matter.
Well, to the point that you may be making that I intimidated anybody.
No, sir. No, not you, Mr. Chair. Mr. Chair, you actually straightened it up.
And Representative Parkinson, I was fearful that the crosstalk was getting away, and so that was my point, to make sure everybody was talking in an order so they could be heard, and that was the point. And
I commend you on keeping order in the room. Here's on this subject. We debated this subject quite a bit 2 years ago when it was state and local committee, and this very subject came up in regards to students being able to use their college IDs from public institutions in the state of Tennessee. And the argument then was that the student ID could be easily duplicated. But so can a driver's license, so can a gun permit, so can a passport, and any other forms of ID. But one of the arguments that was made was that back then the students, if I'm not mistaken, the students' monies that they had in regards to their college funding was kept on these same ID cards. These same ID cards were also the same ID cards that gave them access to buildings and access to areas of the college that they needed to have access to. So the security in the card was obviously there. And I think it's interesting that if these student ID cards have so much or so much vital information on it regarding that student or that individual, that we found the student ID cards not being secure enough to use for voter IDs. And do you want to talk about that briefly?
Student ID?
Yes, sir.
Yes, sir.
You're recognized, Mr. Jones.
Thank you. As Representative Parkinson said, our accounts for our school balances are on these cards. Access to buildings are on these cards. Access to go eat food is on these cards. These cards have more on it than a regular Tennessee driver's license have on it. So they often they are secure, as we were stating, and there's nothing that would make this more easily duplicated than a regular ID. We just had a case, even of someone duplicating a passport. It was been on CNN lately. So there are documents. We don't have an ID right now possible that is not able to be duplicated. And so every single form of ID can be duplicated.
Representative Parkinson, you're recognized.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. And Mr. Chair, and I want to caution not just the committee but our legislator in these aspects. I remember my very first bill that I brought to the legislature was to get civics put back in school. Some of you may remember that, and it did not pass. I was literally right because I wanted civics in the local civics in 6th grade, state civics in 7th grade, federal civics in the 8th grade to prep our students before they went into high school and before they went into college, so that they know our form of government, and we could then breed or churn out a product that's involved in our form of government. Now, in the absence of those civics, we now have a product that's coming out of our high schools and into our colleges that and they want to be involved in our form of government, but there are barriers that are being put before them to allow them to be involved in our very form of government. We have the best form of government on God's green earth. And we should be more open. We should be open and inviting to making sure our youth, because these faces that we're looking at right now, these very faces that we're looking at right now are going to be the very faces that protect us in our older age, that decide whether or not Social Security will still be around, that decide the very issues that we are fighting for, or that will be coming up before us in the next few years. So it is important that we allow them and make sure that they have a foundation of how our very form of government works, how democracy works, and the very same democracy that we fight wars for, overseas, that our men and women of the military go to war for. And thank you, Mr. Chair. I appreciate your time and your indulgence. Thank you to our guests.
Thank you, Representative Parkinson. Without objection, we'll go back into session, and Representative Hardaway, you're recognized.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. And normally, I would have a lot to say, but fortunately, young Mr. Jones, Justin Jones, has made a very articulate and eloquent presentation to the committee. You may disagree with him on some of his positions, but I think you will agree with me that this is what democracy is all about, and it's why we are here. Not only to enact laws and to debate laws, but to promote participation by, of all people, our young folks. And I've never had a day where I'm prouder. They organized all of the effort. They presented the language that they wanted to be debated before the committee. And I just want to tell you how proud I am of the group, and I appreciate the committee indulging the testimony from the group and the back and forth from the committee members. I think that Representative Parkinson, Representative Miller, Representative Hill, Representative Durham have all contributed to the growth of these young people, because they have allowed them to interact with their government. And this says it all to me. So with that having been said, well, Mr. Chairman,
we have the amendment before us, and the chair takes note that you mentioned almost every member of the committee except for the chair. And the chair took special note of that. But
Mr. Chairman, I was saving the best for last.
Chair, it's too late.
To be mentioned within its own category.
But with that, we have the amendment before us. So, Chairman Hill, you are recognized on the amendment.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman, and I do appreciate Mr. Jones and appreciate the students and folks here today. Anytime citizens want to address the legislature, which is their house, the House of Representatives is the people's house. And it doesn't mean that we're going to agree 100% of the time, but that doesn't matter. What matters is that this is the people's house, and that everyone should have a fair hearing, up or down, on all of their bills, on all of their amendments, no matter if they're in subcommittee or full committee, or even what the subject matter is either. Now, are you ready, Representative Hardaway? Let's get started. Section 1 of your bill.
Mr. Chairman, let me locate Section 1.
Section 1 is toward the top of the page.
Just for the record, we're on the amendment. Now, a point of order. Would the committee prefer that we adopt the amendment so we can see the amendment, or because Chairman Hill, you have the floor here.
It's my understanding that, and you correct me if I'm wrong, Mr. Chairman, we have had a motion and a second on the amendment, so we're on discussion of the amendment.
We're on discussion on the amendment, so I want to make sure that's what we're discussing here.
Yes, sir. I am on the amendment.
You are recognized, Chairman Hill.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I plan to stay on the amendment. Under Section 1, your amendment would delete the following language, and it's my understanding that paragraph, so we don't have to read the whole thing, you would be deleting current code, which is the voter ID law. Is that correct? The current voter ID law that's on the books?
That's correct, sir.
And then in Section 2, you would substitute and create you would delete the subdivision that says to compare the voter's signature on the application, the voter shall supply evidence of identification specified. And then that's where we are in Section 3, where we started a few minutes ago, where you want to get rid of to verify them, and instead you want to compare the signature. Is that also correct?
Well, I believe we were at the point where legal was going to comment on the change in that language.
Yeah, that's right. But I want to, and if that, with your indulgence, Mr. Chairman, I would more than welcome the explanation, but I would like you to come back to me, Mr. Chairman, because I want to make sure that everybody completely understands what we're doing with this amendment, and that this amendment is not just about putting posters out. So I want to be clear
if there
about
is
that.
no objection, we're going to get a description from legal with regard to the amendment. If you'll identify yourself, please, sir.
Clay Bird, Legal Services. That is correct. The First Amendment deletes references to the photo ID requirement in Section 1. The second section provides, in lieu of that photo ID requirement, process whereby on an application for ballot, the signature is compared when a voter goes to the polls, the application and signs the application for ballot. That signature is compared on to another form of identification, which is also defined in the bill, to include voter's registration card or certificate, and I'm referring to Section 6 now, Tennessee driver's license, Social Security card, and a credit card bearing the applicant's signature, or other document which bears the applicant's signature. So it deletes the photo ID requirement and puts in its place a signature requirement that is compared against those other documents.
Thank you, Mr. Byrd. Mr. Chairman?
Chairman Hill, you're recognized.
Also, I just want to point out to the subcommittee that in Section 4 it says that we would delete the language that currently is in the code that says if a voter is unable to present evidence of identification, the voter shall be entitled to vote a provisional ballot pursuant to subsection E unless the voter is eligible to vote pursuant to subsection F. So in other words, we're taking the provisional ballot away. Now, I just have a question. I have a couple questions, but the first question is this. Under Section 4 of your amendment, Representative Hardaway, are we not suppressing people's right to vote? Because at the end of the day, if you take away their ability to have a provisional ballot, then they wouldn't be able to vote at all. Well,
Mr. Chairman, I would disagree with you on that point. Let me address an earlier point and then get right to that. The abstract is what I read to you earlier, and I agree with you that it was not accurate. So I read that directly from the fiscal memorandum.
We've all had that happen. That's fine.
Yes, sir. Yeah. And when it comes down to why we have a provisional ballot, that boils down to whether or not you want to proceed at that time, and the local election commission has an obligation at that point to take that provisional ballot, hold it, to verify it at some later date. And what we found is that in Shelby County, that on more than one occasion, these provisional ballots have gone uncounted, period. So I don't know that we're suppressing vote by eliminating this particular section, and I think that we pick it up, and I'll ask once again, Mr. Chairman, that we pick up those rights for provisional balloting in another section of the code.
You do. Thank you, Mr. Chairman. In Section 5, though, you do require a voter to execute an affidavit of identity on a form provided by the County Election Commission. Is that something that's current practice?
For the that the individual would have to sign a roll?
Yeah. I mean, not the roll, but to execute an affidavit of identity on a form. Is that just another way, a legalese way to just say the roll, the voter roll?
Well, I'll defer to
Or is that
legal,
something new that
Mr.
we're
Chairman.
adding, that you're wanting to add into the code?
Chairman Hill, would you like that directed to legal?
Please, sir.
Clay, could you?
It is added as a new subdivision in that particular section.
So this is not current practice?
It's not currently in the law.
Okay, then thank you, Mr. Chairman.
You're recognized, Chairman Hill.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Then the next question would be, what is the fiscal impact to our localities of this amendment? Because if we're not currently doing an affidavit of identity, we're obviously going to start doing that if we adopt this amendment. You know, what does that look like? What is the cost involved with that? These are just questions that I think need to be considered. You know, at the end of the day, also on Section 6, where you said and legal had already described this, all the various ways, identifications that would be permissible under your amendment. One that really causes me pause is it says a credit card bearing the applicant's signature. I mean, with the amount of identity theft that is out there, with the amount of credit cards that are stolen, and we heard testimony earlier from Mr. Jones about, you know, how things can be copied, driver's licenses, passports, things like that. I mean, you know, we read every day online on the news, or we hear on the news about people's credit card numbers getting stolen, and then the credit cards are fake ones, of course, are made and manufactured. That's a real concern, a real issue, I think, of security, if nothing else. And we're not even talking about voting. We're just talking about security in general and identity theft. And so, you know, I really do, and I hope you see I've tried to be contemplative with you on this. We've gone through every single section of this amendment.
I'll respond to your last one.
I just want to say that I understand, I think, what you're attempting to do here. But I just have a lot of concerns about it for the various reasons that I've done. And I know I've taken a lot of time, but I wanted you to know where I was coming from instead of just, why is he voting that way? Because, I mean, in the last one with the credit card, I mean, there's no way. There's no way, because that could be open to identity theft left and right. So those are just my concerns.
Mr. Chairman.
You're recognized, Representative Hardaway.
Thank you, sir. And I appreciate all of the critique of the language and the amendment from the Chairman Hill, and I see some legitimacy in some of what you've said, and I'm looking forward to working with you on language that is acceptable to both of us so that we can increase access to voting by the majority of the people without putting unnecessary hindrances and inconveniences in their way. So I take it in the spirit that you've offered it, sir, and you've always been deliberative in the way that you've approached legislation, and I'm certainly going to take note of your suggestions, and I'm looking forward to working with you so we can satisfy the concerns of our young people.
Representative Parkinson, did you want to be recognized? I thought I saw your hand go up. I assume that's a yes since you're grabbing the mic.
Yes, sir, Mr. Chair. I think I do. Mr. Chair, can we get a roll call vote on the amendment? And
we can.
Okay. And on the bill, Mr. Chair.
We can get a roll call vote on the amendment and on the bill.
Thank you.
We got an objection to the roll call. We need 3 hands. We go 1, 2, 3 on the roll call. Okay. Well, I'm seeing 3 hands when we on the amendment. You'll have to make the same request when we get to the bill.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. And Mr. Chair, I have a to the sponsor, if it's okay, Mr. Chair.
You're recognized.
Thank you. To the sponsor. And by no means am I trying to change your bill or anything, but would it be simpler for us just to add student IDs from public institutions in the state of Tennessee as an acceptable form of ID?
Mr. Chairman.
You're recognized.
Thank you, sir. And we may be able to do that. I would have to, once again, defer to legal to make sure that we don't have to address some of the other areas of the code in order to keep everything consistent. But in essence, that's the simplicity that I would like to get to for our college age students and other college students who are non-traditional students. Because I think at the end of the day that you made an excellent point on the necessary security that's encoded in our student IDs, and to some degree they might be more effective than some of the IDs that we're allowing to be used for acceptable IDs at the poll. I think in particular, when I've researched online the ability to duplicate driver's licenses, it's become just extremely easy in order to secure these over the internet. And now passports are the same way. I think one of the committee members and Mr. Jones address the fact that we're in the middle of one of the worst, most horrific tragedies that we've ever seen with airlines. And one of the concerns is that we had fake documents that at least two of the people who were on board that airline, that they had fake documents. And if we're not going to be able to secure things that simple, then I'd say that we need to go back at the beginning and make sure that we're not hindering but promoting access to the post.
Representative Parkinson,
Thank you, Mr. Chair.
let me make a point here. I would hopefully that we can kind of move things
Yes,
on
sir.
a little bit, because we're plowing some pretty old ground that's been plowed rhetorically in here. So can we kind of, if we got a question, let's ask the question. Let's keep the speech making.
Thank you, Mr. Chair.
Representative Parkinson.
Thank you for that, Mr. Chair. Mr. Chair, and this is a question for you. If I was to offer, if I was to offer a friendly amendment to just basically add student IDs and from public institutions, would I have to make that on the bill, or would I have to make that in this where we are now? Because I don't want to amend the amendment. I want to just amend the bill.
Well, what we need to do before you can amend the bill is we need to adopt the amendment. And the amendment has not been adopted. So before you can amend the bill, all we have in front of us, ladies and gentlemen, is the amendment. If you want to amend 1A to the amendment, you may. You may offer that. But remember, the policy of this committee from the very beginning is any substantive amendment had to be filed in a timely fashion. That would be a substantive amendment in the opinion of the chair. So you can still nonetheless offer it, but you can't, if you don't want to amend, if you just want to amend the bill and not the amendment, this isn't the proper place to do it. We need to adopt the amendment because the amendment makes the bill.
And if we do not adopt the amendment, then
we'll have the bill in front of us.
Thank you. Okay.
You could do it at that point.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Thank you so much.
Having said all that, we have the amendment before us, and we need to vote on the amendment. If there are no objections, the chair seeing none, all those in favor of the amendment say aye. You did ask for a roll call. My apologies. Mr. Clerk, take the roll. Thank you, Representative Face.
Representative
Durham, my apologies.
Representative Carr-Sphere. Representative Durham. Representative Floyd. Representative Hall. Representative Miller. Representative Parkinson. Chairman Hill. Chairman Carr. Noes 6, ayes 2.
The amendment fails. We're back on the bill without the amendment. Chairman Miller, you're recognized.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. A suggestion, Representative Hardaway and Chairman Hill at some point was discussing how could you make this a better bill. Mr. Chairman, you mentioned we have 2 more meetings?
One, sir.
One meeting.
This
meeting, and then and next week would be the last meeting.
Chairman Miller, next Wednesday is our last meeting for the last calendar.
And I'm just suggesting to sponsor the bill as well as Chairman Hill, if we can take an opportunity possibly to take another week to see if, in fact, we can work an agreeable, amendable amendment that makes the bill. And it's just a suggestion to both the sponsors as well as Chairman
Is that question
Hill.
directed at a member of the committee?
Yes, Chairman Hill and Representative
Well, Chairman
Hardaway.
Hill, your name's been called, so would you respond, please?
Well, thank you, Mr. Chairman. At the end of the day, I believe that the photo ID law is a good law, needs to stay in place. I don't have a problem with further studying, about college IDs. I don't think that there's any problem with studying that and taking a look at that. I'm being very honest. I am not at a place where I feel comfortable adopting legislation right now dealing with college IDs. I am comfortable, though, with studying that issue because I think Mr. Jones brought up some salient points, and I don't think there's anything wrong with studying that issue. But, I voted no on the amendment because it repealed the entire photo ID law, and I'm not in favor of that. But I'm not opposed to further studying the issue of college ID. I'm not opposed to studying that at all.
Representative Parkinson, you're recognized.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. With the committee's indulgence, Mr. Chair, with your indulgence and with the sponsor's indulgence, I would like to offer a friendly amendment to allow college IDs from public institutions.
Well, Representative Parkinson, like I said previously, the chair and this committee has been very, very consistent since day one on significant amendments. They need to be filed in a timely manner. So that would be out of order with regard to the policy and procedure, and for the sake of consistency for other bills that have come before this committee. So the chair would be opposed to that type of amendment unless it's meant for grammatical or something of that nature. The chair would not be willing to go along with that.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. But does that go before a vote, or does it not?
Well, if you want to call for a vote on offering an amendment, we can certainly do that.
I'm just asking
parliamentary.
You know.
No.
Okay.
If you want to file that amendment, if there's an opportunity that where this bill's heard next week, then you certainly have an opportunity to do that. I'm at the will, as the chair, I'm at the will of the committee, but I'm going to make sure that we treat everybody the same when they come before this committee, and this chair has tried to do that.
That's completely understandable, Mr. Chair. Yes, sir. Yes, I would like to make a motion.
What's the motion?
The motion is to add college IDs, make college IDs acceptable forms of ID from public institutions in the state of Tennessee.
We got a motion before us to amend the bill.
I'm going to give you a second.
Thank you, Chairman Miller. You instinctively knew where we were. I'm not surprised. We have a motion and a second. Would you before we take the vote, would you please tell legal what your motion is in the form of amendment so the committee understands perfectly what it is that we're voting on?
Thank you, Mr. Chair. And to legal, it simply adds college IDs from public institutions in the state of Tennessee as acceptable forms of voter ID.
You got it? Okay. If there are no objections, we are ready to vote on. Is that an objection? On the voting on the amendment?
No, I'll get to it on questions on that.
Thank you. We're voting on the amendment. All those in favor of adopting the amendment, say aye. Aye. All those opposed, say no.
No. Mr. Chairman.
The noes have it. Chairman Miller, we're in the middle of a vote. Your timing is poor, please, sir. I'm trying to be very deliberate here, Chairman Miller, so we don't run over people. So you are now recognized. The amendment fails. You're recognized, Chairman Miller.
Mr. Chairman, I'm going to suggest probably to roll this bill, committee roll, or if it's appropriate, and we have one more week to talk about the possibility of coming up with an amendment to do a study and or another amendment to include college universities that are not only public but private as well, and just give to give that a week to work itself. So I'm just going to a motion, if it's appropriate, Mr. Chairman.
We have a motion to roll this bill 1 week. Do we hear a second? Members, please pay attention.
I'm not asking for a roll call vote.
Well, all those in favor, the motion and a second before the committee is to roll this bill 1 week. All those in favor of rolling 1 week, say aye.
Aye.
All opposed? No. Roll call vote, Mr. Clerk.
Representative Carr of Sevier. Aye. Representative Durham. No. Representative Floyd. No. Representative Hall. No. Representative Miller. Aye. Representative Parkinson. Aye. Chairman Hill. No. Chairman Carr.
No.
5-3. 5 noes, 3 ayes.
Motion to roll the bill 1 week fails. We're back on the bill. Any further discussion? Representative Durham, you're recognized.
I don't speak for anyone else on the committee, but if the sponsor did want to pursue a study of the college ID issue for voting, I would probably be okay with reconsidering our actions on the first amendment that was defeated, if you were comfortable saying on record that you would support us sending that to Tasser.
Mr. Chairman, and
You're recognized,
sorry.
Representative Hardaway.
Yeah, I was thinking that I would have gotten a chance to speak after Chairman Hill because I'm looking forward to, and I appreciate the invitation from Chairman Hill, to work on suitable language to put a study committee initiative in place. So I am certainly open to that, and I appreciate Representative Durham and Chairman Hill for the willingness to engage going forward. And that is what I would have preferred, that after Chairman Hill, that we moved in that direction. And if you would reconsider so that we can get that before us and maybe free up the committee.
Boy, it's freeing up the committee sounds like a wonderful idea. Representative Hardaway, though, and for Representative Durham, we don't need to reconsider our actions on the amendment for this body to send it to TASER to exhaustively explore all aspects of the bill, including those amendments that were offered and defeated. We can send that with the appropriate instructions. If that's the motion that's to be made, we can certainly do that.
Would you prefer one? I'm sorry.
You're recognized, Representative Durham.
Would you rather be rolled a week to get language together, or would you rather us do TASER now? I'll go along with whichever one you want.
I'm good with
the chair needs to jump in here for a second. We've already taken a roll call vote, Representative Durham, on rolling the bill 1 week. So what we have in front of us, ladies and gentlemen, is we have the bill still in front of us. So if Representative Hardaway was asking for the committee to send this bill to TASER, along with the amendments that failed, we can do that. And so TASER then can study it and then come back with a full report for it to be brought up and next year. But so Representative
I'm
Hardaway,
amenable to that, Chairman, and I think whatever the procedural methods are that you need to go through.
okay, we have a motion to send this bill to TASER and a second. Is there, Chairman Miller? Before we
Just a question. I support that. Would the bill go directly from this subcommittee to TASER, or will we have to go to full committee?
No, sir.
Okay.
Chairman Miller, the bill goes directly to TASER with our instructions for it to be studied.
And the timeline?
Well, that would be up to TASER, but since we're going, because TASER has to meet, but we will send it to them, and the timeline would be this summer, I presume, if history is any indication.
Okay.
So we will instruct, this committee can instruct TASER to review this bill between now and the end of the year so the report can be made by the next General Assembly.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Chairman Miller. We have a motion and a second to send the bill to TASER. All those in favor say aye. Aye. Opposed? Ayes have it. The bill goes to TASER.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Thank you, committee.
Item number 5, ladies and gentlemen. You're out of order. Sergeant at Arms, please move them. Please move them out now, please. We're in recess for 5 minutes. 5 minutes, ladies and gentlemen. The chairman detects a quorum, and I want to make a statement before I recognize Chairman Hill. This committee will not be hijacked, especially when this chair and this committee make every effort to make sure everybody is equally and fairly heard. With that, Chairman Hill, you are recognized.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. It's come to my attention we need to move to reconsider our actions on item number 14, House Bill 2373.
We've got a motion and a second. Any discussion? Seeing none, all those in favor of reconsidering action say aye. Aye. All those opposed, the ayes have it. Actions are reconsidered.
I call for question on the bill.
We got a motion and a second. We got a question on the bill. All those in favor of passage of the House Bill 2273 say aye. Chairman Miller, we're in the middle of a vote. All those opposed say no. The noes have it. The bill fails. Chairman Miller, you're recognized.
Mr. Chairman.
Yes, sir.
I want to be recognized on the bill.
Chairman Miller, we were in the middle of a vote. Now, Chairman Miller, hold on a second. Hold on. Everybody just take it down a notch. I have gone out of my way this whole session to be accommodating to everybody. What just happened, Chairman Miller, was a hijack of this committee when I think even though we disagree, there was still a great deal of decorum and orderliness that took place. I want to make that real clear because we can't allow, whether I'm the chair or you're the chair, to any group to come in here and conduct themselves in that matter. What we had then is we had two members make the motion properly to reconsider their actions. It was seconded and a vote was taken. That was orderly and within the rules of the committee. Having said that, Chairman Miller, you are recognized.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Under personal privilege, and I agree with you, Mr. Chairman.
You are recognized for personal privilege.
Thank you.
You're welcome.
You conducted this meeting as a gentleman, professionally, and you've given each member an opportunity to express themselves. I was somewhat surprised by the music at the time, but I didn't take it personal. Mr. Chairman, what was just conducted with the reconsideration of this bill, those members that supported that, I think you took this personal. And that's so unfortunate that you took it personal, as opposed to understanding that and taking that as statesmen. And that's the difference. That's the difference. And I hope going forward that you all will become more statesmen than taking this personal. Because if we took it personal, I couldn't handle it. I wouldn't even want to be here. Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Thank you, Chairman Miller. For the record, the chair did not take it personally. What the chair detected was decorum outside of the proper protocols that this chair and this committee have conducted themselves properly for the last several months. Representative Parkinson, for what purpose?
I guess for clarity, Mr. Chair, we recessed for 5 minutes, and I don't think I was gone for 5 minutes.
Well,
and something happened. I don't know what happened, Mr.
We
Chair.
recessed for 5 minutes. After the disturbance left, the chair detected a quorum. There was a motion made to reconsider our actions about sending the bill to TASER. There was a second. We took a vote, and the motion to reconsider our actions passed, and then the bill was then brought up for a vote, and the bill failed on a vote.
Mr. Chair, I apologize, but I thought I got back within the 5 minutes, and I was expecting a 5-minute recess. I had to go to the restroom, and I would like to have been part of that discussion on what happened in regards to the reconsideration.
Well, Representative Parkinson, the chair apologizes to you specifically. It wasn't certainly the chair's intent, or I don't believe any member of this committee's intent to remove you or keep you from the proceedings. It's for the apologies of the chair to you, sir. It wasn't our intent that that happened.
Thank you, Mr. Chair.